Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I am the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Now, please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live because all presentations will be recorded. A few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker for today. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa History page of YouTube in a few days. I've disabled the chat function, but if you have questions for the Q&A, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague Ethan Atwell is watching that feature, and he will prepare a list of questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. Please note we may not be able to get to all the questions before our time runs out today. And also, a few days following the program, a thank you email will be sent, which includes a list of additional readings and resources for you to dig deeper into this topic. And now I'm pleased to present and introduce our presenter, Robert Warren. Robert Warren was hired as Executive Director of the Hoyt Sherman Place September of 2015 and was given the title of Chief Executive Office in 2021 after successfully leading the organization through the COVID pandemic. His decorated career also includes positions such as associate producer at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., executive producer for Creative Vision Entertainment in Washington, D.C., executive director of Hartford Performs in Hartford, Connecticut, and director of community engagement at the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall in Sarasota, Florida. He started his arts administration career in Cedar Falls, Iowa, as the first general manager for the newly restored Oster Regent Theater, where he was instrumental in bringing the Cedar Falls Main Street back to life. Mr. Warren is a proud father of his two adult sons and his service in the U.S. Army as a communications specialist for White House Communications. And now I'm very happy to turn over to Robert to begin today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing us some time to share about the life and legacy of Hoyt Sherman. We are going to talk a little bit about why he ventured out into the unknown, starting with his early childhood and family connections, as well as what he did while in the city and into his elder years as a statesman here within the mansion where I'm sitting today. We'll also then talk a little bit about how we continued on with the legacy that Hoyt built and how his namesake and legacy property is as prominent as ever in Des Moines. So we're going to start with a little bit of the family history. If you come visit Hoyt Sherman Place, at the top of the stairwell in the mansion, you'll see the original family tree. The Sherman family dates all the way back to Essex, England, at the root of the tree, but it's also footnoted that the lineage can be traced back to 1256 when they were mutton farmers. The interesting thing about that, with mutton, you had a lot of shearing to do. So their name, the root of the name Sherman, is they were all shearmen. So we're very proud of that lineage and bringing Hoyt all the way to the top of the tree. So we'll start with his father, Charles Robert Sherman. He was an Ohio State Supreme Court justice. He and his wife Mary had 11 children, and he also served as a major in the Ohio militia in 1823, and then he began his judgeship. Back in the day, the judges had to ride on horseback to the circuits, to the different various courthouses, and sadly, Hoyt's father died young while he was out in Lebanon, Ohio, on horseback. He was buried there originally, but they moved them back to the original home of Lancaster, Ohio. And even sadder, Judge Sherman left his wife with no means of support and 11 children, the oldest being 18 at the time and the youngest a baby girl. Hoyt was number 10 of the 11, so he was 3 years old, so probably had very little recollection of his father. His mother, Mary Hoyt, was also from Connecticut. She did end up raising the 11 children after losing her husband and lived to the age of 64 and passed in 1852. Hoyt's name is obviously his mother's maiden name, which they used as his first name. When her husband died, the only way that Mary could survive was to keep the youngest two children with her, and the older ones that were from 18 down to age 6 were sent to live with other relatives and or with co-workers of their father in the court system. Obviously, the most famous of the siblings was General William Tecumseh Sherman. Born in 1820 in Lancaster, Ohio, he lived until 1891 and ended up with his latter years in New York City. He, being 16 at the time, was sent to live with Thomas Ewing, a U.S. senator who was a friend of his father's. And that connection helped him get a commission at West Point at the age of 16. He also lived in the house with Mr. Ewing and his children. One who was 4 years younger than him was Ellen, no relation. After a few years at West Point and garnering the most number of demerits of any attendee to actually graduate from West Point Academy, he went back to his hometown and he married Thomas Ewing's daughter, Mary Ellen. His original goal was not to be a military hero or be involved 100% as a military officer. His very first job was the superintendent of Louisiana State Seminary and Learning Military Academy, which eventually became LSU. He stayed in that job and really, really enjoyed it until Franklin Pierce was elected president in 1853. The reason that General Sherman, not named general at the time, resigned immediately is because he knew Franklin Pierce was sympathetic to the South and was not a fan of abolishing slavery, and in fact signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which led to the breakup of the Union and the South seceding. General William Tecumseh Sherman's birth certificate is Tecumseh Sherman. His father was a huge Indian historian. He marveled at Tecumseh, his savage warring, and he named his son Tecumseh Sherman. It wasn't until Thomas Ewing semi-adopted General Sherman that the name William was added when he was baptized. So after leaving LSU, he started to work back in with the military system, and he was the commander for the first Battle of Bull Run in 1861, which sadly led to a terrible nervous breakdown after seeing all of the death and carnage, and had to be put on leave, went back to Lancaster to recoup and recover. And it was during this time that he decided that his strategy would change from hand-to-hand fighting or physical destruction to that of more of property destruction. Obviously, as the Union general, he was the one responsible for capturing Atlanta, which turned the tides, and the rallying cry of Sherman's March to the Sea, written in 1864. I'll share a little bit more with that later. That was written by Major Byers, who was a better writer than a soldier. He was captured 5 times. On his 5th capture in a Confederate encampment, he got word that General Sherman's troops were marching through. He escaped. He had written Sherman's March to the Sea, and he said he had to get to the general to share it with him. And of course, that was one of the defining moments of history. He commanded the military division in Mississippi later on, then became the general of the United States Army, overseeing Reconstruction and the military control of the South. General Sherman visited Hoyt Sherman Place, the mansion, multiple times. The last one was in 1878, and he agreed to meet with soldiers from the Civil War, and apparently they had lined up 3 days in advance, and he spent 13 hours shaking hands. Another prominent member of the family, Lamson Sherman, who was just a year older than Hoyt, born in 1821, lived till 1900. He was sent to a family that ran the Cincinnati Gazette after his father died and learned about printing and newspaper editing and writing. So after Hoyt arrived, the next year he invited his brother Lamson to join him because he really was speaking highly through his letters of what the area had to offer. So he moved to Des Moines in 1849. He helped draft the original city charter for what was then Fort Des Moines in 1851. He rose to the level of city council, mayor of Des Moines, city recorder, and city treasurer. And he was employed by his younger brother, who had already opened Hoyt Sherman and Company Bank. Lamson and his wife Susan had 8 children, but only 5 of them survived to adulthood. It was very endemic at that time. Many of the children died during the 1800s due to sanitation problems, disease without vaccinations, and poor drinking water, which is what led Hoyt to help create the first original waterworks surface for sanitary drinking water. Lamson's house was originally on Drake campus. It's on the National Historic Register, but it was moved just off of Cottage Row after the Drake University expansion began. His next brother, who, along with General Sherman, really became father figures for Hoyt because they were late teens by the time he got to know them, and they really did mentor him. John Sherman, born 1823, also in Lancaster, died in Washington, D.C. in 1900. He was a representative for Ohio for many years. Then he was elevated to the U.S. Senate from 1861 to 1877, took a break during a time where he didn't agree with presidency, and came back in 1881 to 1897. His highest ranks, Secretary of the Treasury under President Rutherford Hayes, Secretary of State under President William McKinley, and probably most notable for being the author of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, which prohibited monopolies and antitrust competitiveness. At the time he wrote it, it was about railroads and banking trying to create monopolies. But still today, you've probably heard about it in the news with Live Nation and Ticketmaster, and the Sherman Antitrust Act is the one piece of legislation that they were using to target that breakup. He married Margaret Stewart in 1846, and they had 8 children. Fun facts about John Sherman: he was the 3-time Republican candidate for president of the United States, but at 6'3" and thin as a rail, with bright red hair and bad teeth and a wicked laugh, nobody could warm up to him. And in fact, the newspapers coined the expression of the Ohio icicle. And next, we're going to get into a few of the children. We don't have a lot of history of Hoyt's children from the writings, but we do know a lot about Adeline Sherman Wyborg. She was born here in Des Moines in this mansion in 1859, and she lived until 1917 and passed in New York, New York. She married Frank Wyborg, who was the owner of the Dunes Estate in East Hampton, Long Island. It was one of the largest, most expensive mansions ever built. And I believe it was on 70 acres of prime real estate with the ocean view on one side and Long Island Sound on the other. Their money came from manufacturing. In particular, they developed ink for the printing presses. Mother of 3 daughters, Mary, Olga, and Sarah. And so just put a placeholder on that youngest daughter, Sarah, who she named after her own mother. Their youngest daughter, the one that spent the most time living in the mansion here on Sherman Hill, she was born in 1873. She lived until 1961 and passed at her beach house cottage in Rhode Island. Hoyt and Sarah's daughter lived in Hoyt Sherman Place from 1877 until 1894. She was extremely talented, a great writer, a great orator, played piano, sang. So she was very popular in Des Moines. And when she would come back to visit, people would have calling cards waiting to see her again. She moved to the East Coast and she married William Oglesby Griffith, who was the head of the Philadelphia Auto Club and very successful, and then started writing. She had a whole series of New York Times bestsellers called Letty Gray, and they were books specifically about young girls going on adventures. She was visiting the Des Moines Women's Club here at Hoyt Sherman Place twice after they started using the building as their clubhouse in 1914 and as late as 1935. She actually had to approve the expansion of the women's club into the second floor of the mansion when they wanted to remove walls and doors and fireplaces to accommodate the larger crowd. She spent her summers at the Sherman Estate in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Hoyt's uncles from Ohio were in the naval sea ship business and became captains and actually built the naval shipyard in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. During COVID, we got a call from a gentleman that was hired to tear down a small beach cottage on the Sherman Estate and wanted to know if we were connected to Hoyt or General Sherman. And of course, we said yes. In that little cottage where Helen passed away, on the compound of the main mansion, she had a treasure trove of documents that she saved and then her nephew saved of the Shermans. Everything from Civil War discharge papers to handwritten letters from her father to her for the 5 to 6 years right before his passing. And next we have in the family lineage, two of my favorites. Remember I said Adelaide or Addie's 3 daughters, who with her influence took them to Paris on whims in the summers. Sarah ended up, after being born in Ohio in 1883, lived till a very old age in 1975 and passed away just outside of DC. The granddaughter of Hoyt and Sarah, named after Hoyt's wife, and she was a little darling for Hoyt. When Adeline Sherman passed away, Sarah was only in her teens, so she came to live with Hoyt, and he became her charge and went to boarding school in Davenport, Iowa, which we discovered through these letters that were gifted to us. She attended Yale University and married Gerald Murphy in 1915, and they also had 3 children. Gerald has a great story as well. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, died in 1964 in their East Hampton estate. His parents were the owners of Mark Cross Company, which were luxury leather goods, high-end pens, all kinds of office accoutrements, and were extremely wealthy. After Gerald and Sarah got married and had the children living in New York City in an apartment, there was a lot of friction between her mother-in-law and her. So again, on a whim, she said to her husband, let's go to Paris for the summer. So they packed up and they moved the children to Paris. And as luck would have it, the little flat that they rented was next door to Pablo Picasso. Pablo fell in love with Sarah's beautiful Midwestern looks. And since he was a poor, struggling artist at the time, didn't have the funds to pay for models. So he struck a deal with Gerald. And he said, Gerald, I will teach you how to paint if you allow me to use your beautiful wife as my model. And he did. He painted numerous pictures of Sarah, but you'll see in a little while, they actually were quite successful. He must have been a good teacher too. But that introduction to Pablo Picasso led to him inviting them to visit Ernest Hemingway in Key West. And Ernest also fell in love with this it couple and decided that they needed to take the kids back to Long Island and let them play in the water. So they went to F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald Estate for 2 years, met Cole Porter, and they truly were the it couple of the 1920s. F. Scott ended up writing Tender as the Night, one of his best novels based on Sarah and Gerald Murphy. These are 2 of the pieces that I mentioned by Pablo Picasso. The first one, Portrait of Sarah Murphy, 1923. That is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the piece that Gerald created at the tutelage of Picasso, Wasp and Pear, is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City as well. So let's get to Hoyt Sherman himself. He arrived in this area called Fort Des Moines at the confluence of the Raccoon and Des Moines River in 1848. He passed the Iowa bar after being self-taught with probably some help from his brother, John Sherman, and the others in the family, and really truly fell in love with the beauty and saw in his vision how the country was expanding and as quickly as it was. My sort of analysis of that, the Shermans were the 1850s version of the Kennedy family. Athletic, military, the daughters were fashionistas, writers, learned, very scholarly, but they had that urge to go across the country through manifest destiny and help the country expand. The first photo on the left side, as I mentioned to you, when Hoyt got to Des Moines, there were 127 residents and no eligible females. So after passing the bar and then being appointed as the first postmaster with President Zachary Taylor, successfully building the post office, successfully opening his own business, the Bank of Sherman, helping put the streets and rail system together in Des Moines, he felt that the town was ready to start to expand, and he felt comfortable knowing that he had a job to go back to his hometown of Lancaster, Ohio, marry his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Moulton, on Christmas Day, and bring her back to Des Moines to start a family. That second picture there is the Sherman family when they gathered for the last time when General Sherman came to meet and greet soldiers of the Civil War. The tallest figure is General Sherman in the dark black with a gray beard at this point. The shorter figure within that arch is Hoyt. He was the only one that didn't hit 6 feet tall in his family, including some of his sisters. And it's John Sherman to his left and Lamson on the other side of the pole. Okay. So the whole idea of manifest destiny, ripe, fertile land, everything that was available, plenty of opportunity. So I think a lot of that he learned of how to survive after not having a father from age 3 on really helped to instill in him that sense of courage and willingness to try different things. The West was full of opportunity, including inexpensive land, job opportunities. And in 1848, just at the age of 20, he made a mark on Fort Des Moines and never left. Go to the next slide, please. So just some of the accomplishments. After becoming a lawyer, he did a lot of real estate transactions. He helped build the railroad and get the rights to it, not only to go from Des Moines to Keokuk along the river, but also to go east to west across the state, which he was rewarded with the Rock Island Railroad president giving him a lovely Tiffany tea set inscribed for his efforts. Postmaster, building the banks, building the railways, public schools, and insisted that the town have a college and helped open the first college here in Des Moines. In 1850, while he was still working as a real estate attorney, he saw an estate sale from the Pursley family that was sadly in a bankruptcy foreclosure, and bought the 5 acres of land where Hoyt Sherman Place sits for $105, which eventually would become the location. They had a separate house off of High Street. But it was a pretty good price for 5 acres of land. The $5 was his lawyer fee. I don't think you could get that today. And in 1854, the Bank of Sherman and Company was established and merged with Iowa State Bank. In 1855, after he gets married, they're back in town. They have 7 children in Des Moines. And again, because of water quality and other issues, only 5 survived to adulthood. In 1860, the Civil War is getting underway. General Sherman reaches out and requests that President Abraham Lincoln hire his brother to be the paymaster for the Union forces, that he is a meticulous accountant and so good with financial numbers. And President Lincoln agrees, appoints him to the rank of major, and Hoyt goes off to Springfield, Ohio, or Springfield, Illinois, to work for the president directly. After the war is over, obviously Hoyt couldn't wait to get back to his wife and children. And in 1867, at again, the insistence of his older brother, who after the war got into banking and insurance in New York City, encouraged Hoyt, who was sending money to New York to buy these crop insurance and railroad insurance. He said, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you open your own insurance company?" So with Charles Polk, B.F. Allen, the grandfather of the Hubble family, and Hoyt, each with a $100,000 investment, opened Equitable of Iowa, the first insurance company west of the Mississippi. That building still stands at 7th and Locust, the Equitable building, since converted to apartments and condominiums. In 1867, the rest of the economy was really struggling, but because they had invested well, they did start to prosper and do great things for the community, reinvesting all the time. And by 1877, he had amassed enough wealth to build what you now see. It was a 37-room, high-end Victorian mansion, which the newspapers referred to as a society showplace on the grandest scale. To be able to build this house for $105,000 at that time was amazing. Now the entire complex is valued at $66 million, including the additions and the artwork, of course. In 1893, the year after his wife Sarah died, sadly, of essentially a common cold, which turned into pneumonia, with no hospital in Des Moines, he recruited the Sisters of Mercy from Davenport, Iowa, to come to Des Moines and establish a hospital. And part of that commitment was that he would move out of the mansion and allow his 37-room mansion be used as the first Mercy Hospital while he helped them acquire the land where the current Mercy Hospital complex is now, just north of this property. It was $5 for any surgery, according to the record books in the basement, and 25 cents if you had to spend the night. That top photo in the right corner is what the mansion looked like when it was high-end Victorian with a cupola, and there were beautiful breakfast windows on the upper bedroom and off of the dining room. And that lower photo is the Bank of Sherman, which I believe in the records it's 3rd and Court, which now would be that vacant lot where Annie's pub is. So of all those things that he did, and with the current rankings of the city of Des Moines, which now has a population of roughly 215,000. So if you figure he went from 147 residents to 215,000, that's a 90,000% increase in that relatively short period of time if you're looking back historically. But for Iowa to be ranked 12th out of 50 states, 4 of the categories that led to that high ranking were directly related to Hoyt Sherman's Manifest Destiny goals in the late 1800s. Education. He made sure that there were good schools at all levels, all the way up through college. Opportunity, banking, insurance, all of those skill sets that are still very, very relevant today. Insisting on good health care with helping establish the first hospital. Now there are 7 major hospitals in the city region here, metro area of Des Moines, with 2 of them being certified Trauma 1 centers. And of course, infrastructure, from the railroads to the waterworks to the power grids, roads before it was dirt and mud and you couldn't get around in trolley cars, and all of those things truly do have a direct relation to Hoyt's impact on this area. So today, thanks to Hoyt Sherman, the population of Des Moines at 215,000, the suburban area at 750,000, we are now the insurance capital of the world. And according to U.S. News and World's report, we still hold tight at that number 12 spot of the 50 states. Soon we're hoping to crack the top 10. And Hoyt Sherman Place is still a historic space for events and cultural experiences, which he also insisted on in his earlier days living here. Go on to the next. So when Hoyt Sherman passed in 1904, all of his children had already moved out of the area, and none of them wanted to return and take on the task of this big, beautiful house on the hill. So in his will, he agreed to gift the acreage and the mansion to the city of Des Moines with the only caveat that it be always called Hoyt Sherman Place. The city was still struggling financially in 1905, so they locked up the house, boarded up some of the windows, declared the front lawn as an official city park, and let the house stand. Sadly, with the proximity to the hillside, vandals got in. Some of the fixtures were stripped away. A lot of the furniture disappeared. Even marble fireplaces were torn out. Very fortunately for Hoyt Sherman Place, in 1907, that group of ladies in the top photo there with the furs on, the members of the Des Moines Women's Club, who had outgrown their space above the public library, which is now the World Food Prize, literally came knocking. And they asked the city leaders if they would agree to a 10-year lease at $1 a year for them to use the mansion as their clubhouse. And they would raise the money and build a small auditorium and an art gallery on the west side. So those two photos on the bottom of your screen, one is set up for performances and lectures. And when they weren't doing that, they would move all the chairs out of the way and keep that room open to the public Monday through Friday, free of charge, as the first public art museum in the city of Des Moines. And then we'll go to the next slide. Remember, I mentioned Major Byers writing Sherman's March to the Sea. When he got wind of the fact that his general's younger brother's mansion was turned into a museum and art gallery, he approached the members of the Des Moines Women's Club. He and his wife came to visit. They entered the diplomatic corps. After the Civil War, he was the ambassador to Austria. They traveled all over Europe collecting fine art and antiquities. And he said, having lost both of their children and no heir to give their collection to, if the Women's Club would agree at some point to build a second room to house all of his art and artifacts and letters, he would gladly donate them. So it was a handshake deal. They said, when the time comes, we will make that happen. So now we'll go into the real legacy of the Women's Club. If you see here, that's the way that it looked, still Victorian style with a cupola and all of the Victorian accessories along the top part of the mansion and the art gallery to the west. Des Moines Women's Club postcard. They became the most popular club in the entire state, let alone just in Des Moines, and they were bursting at the seams. Within that first 10 years of their lease, by 1915, they knew they had to do something. They had already removed all the walls, doors, fixtures from the second floor to have overflow meeting space, art classes, and a secondary kitchen to feed the members. With a handshake deal and a conversation between Mrs. Fred K. Whites, who was the president of the Des Moines Women's Club, her husband was the founder of White's Construction, went back to city leaders and said, if you can extend our lease for 99 more years at $1 a year, we will raise money to build a grand theater on the east side of the building. And literally with a handshake deal with the mayor and the head of the bank at the time, a deal was struck and the Women's Club set out to raise money. They had all of the funds raised. They signed a contract with White's Construction to build this beautiful theater in 1917. And 2 days later, the United States entered World War I. So obviously the project was mothballed. The ladies continued their service to the soldiers. And instead of building the theater, they started making bandages and everything else to support the war effort. But in the following years after the war, they were successful. We'll go to the next. In 1923, in grand fashion, this beautiful Victorian theater with absolutely perfect acoustics, open to grand style from the things that we can read about it in the newspaper. 1,400 seats, 700 members was going to be their cap, with each member being able to bring a guest. And the whole point of this, which was an idea that Hoyt Sherman started, bring in the smartest, brightest, most talented people to educate and entertain the citizens and the members of the women's club, which they did for many, many years. You'll see in that other photo with a full crowd. That was in 1942. It was a big USO show opening at the end, ironically, of World War II. We'll go to the next slide. This will give you a little reference. 100,000 people come through our door each year, mostly to see a ticketed event in the theater. Very popular space now. And we have concessions and merchandise in the art gallery. They don't even realize that the mansion is still here, even though they passed through it. So that was our focus, to try to bring more attention to all three aspects. Here's a beautiful pictorial visual, the art gallery shaded there in the green, the original mansion in the red, and the addition of the theater in 1923. This model worked very well. Essentially, Hoyt Sherman Place Foundation now has 3 separate nonprofits: a historic mansion, art galleries, and a performing arts center. This worked very well for a lot of years. You can see in this winter scene, it started to become underutilized. By late 70s, early 80s, so many of the women were in the workforce. They had a hard time maintaining that 700 membership, which was essential because as leaseholders, they were still responsible for all the upkeep, all of the maintenance, all of the utilities. And so it really did start to fall on hard times for the women's club. I think their membership had dwindled down to about 125. We show the next picture. So here's this gorgeous building on the hill. You can see the magnitude. And if you imagine just thinking of the roofs at that time, how much money it has to go to upkeep this building. And so a new thought process had to happen. And again, women's club members went back to city leaders, including the grandson of Mrs. White's, who had the idea to build the theater, and the grandson of the contract company, Fred White's, Luther Hill, and George Sullivan and Jack Porter all said, we need to figure out how to save this building. Annabelle Wonders, who had managed the facility, Hoyt Sherman's home, for the women's club for 50 years, said the writing was on the wall, but they had to do everything within their power to save this beautiful building from a third attempt to have it bulldozed down and housing built on this premium piece of land. So in 1995, the Hoyt Sherman Place Foundation was formed, and the women's club relinquished all rights to the leasehold improvements, to the care, including the artwork, for care and permanent protection, to Hoyt Sherman Place Foundation. And the city of Des Moines agreed to put all of the land and the facilities under the care of the foundation as well. An interesting part of this process, Hoyt Sherman Place Mansion was added to the historic landmarks in 1977, and the neighborhood was pretty rough. In addition to the building needing a lot of work, a lot of the older mansions, due to redlining and redistricting, had been torn down or subdivided into apartments. There was a lot of crime. There was drug use. There was all kinds of things in Sherman Hill. But in partnership with the neighborhood association, Jack Porter in particular, he said the key to saving Hoyt Sherman Place is also saving the neighborhood. Fortunately, with state funds, local funds, and federal funds, by having the entire neighborhood designated as a historic district, would be the catalyst for that. And the only way they were able to get the U.S. Treasury, the Secretary of the Interior, and others to agree to rename what was then called Oak Hill, this rundown neighborhood with a lot of cool houses, was the connection to a historic Civil War hero, leader of this community. So it was renamed Sherman Hill, and the entire community is now protected under historic preservation laws. We'll go to the next. So as I said, the theater, disrepair, no air conditioning, a lot of mechanical problems. There were leaks. The attic needed to be re-insulated, the roof, all of that. The one attempt that they had at trying to spruce things up, they literally whitewashed the entire interior of the theater to make it at least look a little cleaner and brighter. But in the first 10 years of the foundation, they realized that really was the moneymaker. That would be the catalyst for saving the entire structure and possibly expanding. So in 2003, 2004, they underwent a campaign to refurbish the interior of the theater. You can see in that top left photo there, scaffolding all the way to the roof of the theater, an artisan off to the right there, starting to scrape away the old layers of white paint and find out the true original colors underneath. And now, if you want to see the grand reveal, this is how this beautiful facility looked in 1923 when it first opened, and fully restored back to its original grandeur in 2004. The seats were lessened a little bit just for accessibility issues, but also because the balcony railing were the cheap seats, and there were 4 rows of wooden seats, so you had trouble seeing behind and over those people behind you. So for the next 10 years, they worked with an outside management company trying to fill up the space and bring in artists that were willing to perform here, and it struggled. I think the best year between 2004 and 2015 was a roughly $300,000 loss. They were borrowing from the endowment fund, but fortunately, in 2015, the board agreed that local team support for managing this beautiful space that would really understand the history of not only Hoyt Sherman, but of the Women's Club legacy, start to tell that story, start to take a little bit more risk on the artists, and fill up the theater. And lo and behold, keeping Hoyt's legacy alive, the building is very solvent with close to 100 headliners a year. And we knew that we wanted to have a big celebration for the 100th anniversary in 2023. So how do you do that when there's literally no backstage space? We'll show you a little bit more in the future. But first, I want to share a few of Hoyt's own words. During the COVID pandemic, we did go out to Rhode Island and retrieved all of Helen Sherman's letters and documents and diaries and all of that. And in there, tucked in a little satchel, were a few handwritten letters from her dad to her. And I just thought, most people just see this black and white figure. They don't know that he was a loving, caring husband, father, grandfather, who very much wanted to stay in touch with his family. So this first letter, I'll share a little bit, from May 16th, 1902, to his daughter. He's responding to a letter that she sent him on the 11th. And she said, "It's really time now, early next month, that we all head back to your place in Narragansett. We love the water. We love the warmer weather. And surprisingly, it does still get very, very cold here in Iowa." So he did have a sense of humor too. He was going to visit his 3 daughters by Helen and Adelaide. "Our new courthouse," he laments, "is currently under construction. It's progressing very slowly. There are people connected with the work who think it to be a fat job and are nursing the work for every ounce of money they can. Other improvements in the city are moving along in a satisfactory way, with the season of growth of this town moving in every single direction." That courthouse is the one that was just restored, the Polk County Courthouse, designed by Proudfoot and Bird, and it was finished 4 years later in 1906. Another fun one, May 1st of 1903, he nicknamed her Hattie. He said, "Dear Hattie, we had a flying visit from the president with his numerous horde of followers on Wednesday for an hour and 40 minutes, during which time he made a general round of the city, delivered a half dozen speeches, shook hands with all of the patriots of Iowa, and has secured all of the Republican support to aid him in his renomination." He says, "It was about the most bold-faced electioneering tour that any president in my experience ever forced me to indulge in, and without any enthusiasm, only sloppy personal admiration of himself." He was referring to his hour and a half in the carriage with Teddy Roosevelt. And also, this one from September of 1903, which, after coming out of a few really tough financial times, trying to establish what form of currency would be best for the United States post-Civil War, they landed on using gold as the signature piece for collateral for the American dollars. And he says, September 8th, 1903, "Dear Hattie, there have been a succession of dinners and teas with the Hubbles, the Windsors, the Wests, the Hattons, and many, many more, all of them, of course, here at our house. And it has lightened up houses that have been darkened and quiet for some time past. It really starts to make our city look lively again. Some months ago, I was planning to go to Washington, D.C. for the second unveiling of General Sherman's statue on the ellipse, but I was forced to abandon it because I cannot endure the fatigue of the journey, but we'll send somebody else to represent." And lastly, a reference to Sarah, his lovely granddaughter, who was apparently a fireball, who lived with him and went to the boarding school in Davenport. He says, "Sarah finally got off to school on Monday. Very regretfully for her. She's thinking it's hard to have to settle down to study once again. I am done with long vacations. If that school proposes to keep them up, I will have to hunt for another school for her. Affectionately yours, Uncle Hoyt." So he really truly was this gentleman master. He loved to write. He loved to keep in touch with everybody. And even though he didn't get to go to Washington, D.C., in the prior spring, he was taken with the president out to New York City, where they unveiled General Sherman's statue at the corner of 59th Street across from the plaza on the edge of Central Park. And he said that was one of the most fulfilling, gratifying times of his life. His brother, General Sherman, had already passed at that point. And 4 months later, January 25th, 1904, Hoyt passes away. So now we'll quickly run through some of the things that we've done to not only continue on with his legacy, but also to improve upon it. If you see in that top photo there, the backstage ended literally with going outside. So all the equipment for the newer, bigger shows coming in had to be pushed up that hill and loaded into that little white door there. So it was quite the cumbersome process. So we decided to design and build what we call the Center for Artisan Education. First floor, sealed loading docks for all of that expensive equipment coming in, private, handicapped accessible dressing rooms, laundry facilities. Second floor is this beautiful community room. And then fortunately, we were able to add a third floor, which allowed us to move the offices out of the mansion and into this space. So 9,000 square feet, completed in March of 2020. All the money had been raised. We got our certificate of occupancy. We had 2 sold out shows with Nate Bergazzi, who we brought to Des Moines for the first time. And on March 17th, we were shut down for COVID and lost $5.5 million of revenue and started the process of rescheduling, not knowing when we could open. But the backstage amenities were a game changer. You can see there the loading dock, all of these beautiful spaces that the artists can spread out in. So they're not using the art gallery for their breakfast, lunch, and dinner space. When COVID hit, we had a decision to make because our business model is new shows, new artists announced every Monday. Now we're up to 2 and 3 each week, with the shows being 90 to 120 days out. Not knowing how long COVID was going to last, we did not want to lose that core team of professionals that helped make the success of Hoyt Sherman Place. So even though we weren't going to tackle the mansion restoration until after the 100th anniversary, we decided we had the time, we had some staff, and we would figure out a way how to pay for it, having lost all of our income. And the top photo there with that gorgeous carpeting was the fishbowl of office spaces on the second floor of mansion. Fortunately, all of the original hardwood floors, the trim work, and some of the fireplaces were saved. So that was our COVID project. Throughout 2020 and through the spring of 21, we finished that. And now I am sitting in this very spot right in front of that gorgeous Raphael painting and the fireplace, which was Hoyt and Sarah's original bedroom, where he probably penned some of these letters. So we're ready to reopen now. And one of our ideas was to do a soft opening with our free concerts on the lawn, less restrictions, less concerns about 1,200 people being enclosed in tight proximity. So we put up some shade sails on the lawn. Fortunately, the derecho took out all of our big shade trees, and we had these spider-looking things on the front lawn that, after they were up, we found out from the State Historic Preservation Office that the view of Hoyt Sherman Place from Woodland Avenue is part of the restrictions. It's called a view shed, and we were not allowed to put anything up that would block that. So when I was rooting around in the attics in the early years trying to find all this cool stuff, and found Apollo and Venus, the painting, also found a couple of blueprint ideas that were never realized. One of them was for an outdoor plaza. So we were able to go back to State Historic Preservation Office and say, hey, this was designed in 1909 by a protege of Olmsted who designed Central Park. And essentially it's a low visual step up from the main road and a beautiful performance platform. And the slope of the lawn is perfect for people to come with a blanket and enjoy a show. So they got on board instantly. We got approval. We raised another $500,000 to put in this plaza, and rolled up in those designs. The other picture to the left there is a landscape design by Etta Bradwell, the first female landscape architect to graduate from Iowa. And she did it as a school project for the Women's Club in 1923. Again, money was a factor. It didn't all get planted, but 80% of her plan and 100% of Charles Mumford Robinson's 1909 Plaza plan were done and completed, and the lawn opened, and we have slowly but surely came back to 100% operations here post-COVID. We'll show you a few more slides. So how fascinating that the artwork has all been completely restored. The frames have been restored with our historic preservation facility fee, which every time you attend a show, anywhere from $1 to $3 goes into a magic locked box for use on these smaller projects around the building. Performances on the stage, everything from Rainbow Kitten Surprise to the Glenn Miller Orchestra, with audiences in their teens up to their 90s, filling up this place night after night. We hit our goal of 100 performances for our anniversary season in 1923. And the great thing about all of the earned revenue from the theater operations, every donated dollar by being a member of the foundation goes to our free activities. One of our favorites is Project Stage. You'll see the kids in the audience, but essentially we bus in 6 different North End Des Moines public schools who work all year long on their Broadway junior musical. And rather than performing it for a handful of kids and no parents in a school cafeteria, all 6 of the schools are bused here. Parents are invited, and they perform all day long for each other. And it's just a magical day of Project Stage. This is the Icicerettes, who did our groundbreaking for the plaza. We support local musicians every chance we get. Hoyt was a big fan of supporting local. So we're still in that mission as well. And with 100 headliners, which most people know about, most people don't know that there are over 400 events in this facility every single calendar year, from breakfast clubs to still hosting free of charge the Des Moines Women's Club every Wednesday, October through May, and everything else in between. We're glad that we have the lawn to expand to, and we're so glad the new Center for Artisan Education with the Barry Bauman Art Institute is teaching classes again. So it all comes full circle. Thank you, Hoyt. Thank you to the entire Sherman family for helping us and giving us such a great story to tell. So with that, I think we have a little time to open it up for questions.
We do. Thank you, Robert, so much for sharing about Hoyt Sherman and Hoyt Sherman Place. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and throw them in the Q&A. I do have a couple questions for you, Robert. So one of the questions is, for those interested in Hoyt Sherman and wanting to research him, where do you recommend people go, or maybe they come to you to learn more about him?
The best place, great question, is right here. I mentioned that when the second floor of the mansion had been gutted for overflow space, they added a secondary kitchen on with a dumbwaiter. During the mansion restoration, we converted that room to a research and archive library. So you can see original documents. You can't check them out, but you can see them. You can feel the space that they lived in and do all that research. And we were able to repurpose that dumbwaiter into an accessible lift. So for the first time in over 100 years, the second floor of the mansion is accessible. We have an education coordinator that is in that room that can help you do and research anything that makes your heart flutter.
Great. Is that also, there was the Des Moines Women's Club. Is that also where you could find information about the Des Moines Women Club?
Yes, correct. Some of the original documents from all of the years of minutes and meetings are stored securely, but we have archival copies. We have everything in our collection now available on our database, which has made it available to the general public, which is fabulous because we've had, through that online presence, 3 of our paintings requested to go out on tour, one to the Denver Art Museum, one to the Smithsonian. So it's a nice way to broaden the reach of Hoyt Sherman and the legacy of the Des Moines Women's Club.
Thank you. So 2 questions, or might be a little shorter, that kind of go together. So you mentioned that Hoyt Sherman helped found a college in Des Moines. Which college was that?
It was Des Moines University.
Okay. And then you mentioned he helped with the water quality within Des Moines at that time. Did he have anything to do with the founding of the Des Moines Waterworks?
Yes, the original Waterworks building, the red brick one that you see just as you start to approach, was expanded upon, but the original Waterworks location with canals and a different system of levees for filtering the water was that same spot. There was also a water purification plant, I believe they called it, right along the Des Moines River up by where Bird Park is now, the Riverbend area.
Great. Thank you for those answers. I'm going to ask, this is our last question. Do you have any upcoming projects you're working on that you would like to share? You shared so much that has happened at Hoyt Sherman Place. What's in the future?
Well, that time gap between 1915, when the theater was designed, acoustically perfect, and it was finished in 1923, there were already talking movies on the horizon. So they never installed, even though the chambers are there for a beautiful 10-rank theater organ. We were just gifted from the Malou Foundation a beautiful, fully restored 1923 Wurlitzer Grand Theater organ and all of the pipes. So the pipes came from the Venetian Theater in Milwaukee, and we're working with a company called Century Pipe Organ out of Minneapolis that is going to do the grand install. They've been here. They are just amazed. It's like opening up a closet that had been locked for 100 years. Those organ chambers are in pristine condition. They can't wait to finish installing them. We're about halfway to our goal. With the organ being donated and all of the pipes, we're just raising money for the installation cost, which was about $180,000, and we're well over half to getting that. So we're looking forward to letting this room and those organ chambers sing for the first time after more than 100 years, with more than 800 pipes tucked away in those organ chambers, and the instrument itself will just make the room sing.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. It's exciting to hear about that change coming in the future. And with that answer, we will bring our webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we would like to extend one last thank you to you, Robert, and your team, and everyone at Hoyt Sherman Place for coming and sharing all this wonderful information with us.
Thank you.
We hope everyone will sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that take place throughout the year. There are many great stories to tell in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history, you can find and watch over 120 recorded webinars of the past 101 programs on the Iowa History YouTube channel, including this one. We look forward to virtually seeing you for the next Iowa History 101 webinar, The American Revolution and Iowa Connections, on July 16th. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.